So welcome to God's Views on Political News. This is where we talk about what the Bible says about what's going on. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Glad you
What's
made
going
it,
on? Invite other people, Bob, because I think it's a little confusing where we are. Even though we're on Stand for Truth with Susan Knowles' page, it's kind of difficult sometimes. So if you can maybe invite people in, that would be great. So again, this is where we talk about God's views and what's going on in our world, and kind of explaining what in politics what's going on, and also at the same time what God has to say about the politics of our time and what's going on. It's always good to have that and know what's being said. So, Bill, I wanted to start out a little bit. There's so much in the news about the travel restrictions that President Trump has put on those people. Now it's those people that are in 6 countries. No longer is Iraq part of the 7 countries that there's going to be a restriction on for, I think, 90 days now instead of 120.
Right.
So, I don't know if you've heard, but Hawaii was the first one now on the new travel executive order, the travel restrictions. Hawaii is the newest state and the first state to go out and file a lawsuit against these restrictions.
I did hear that. Of course, would I be just out in left field to make the point that that's where Obama calls home, or has called home in times past?
Right.
I wouldn't think that it'd be anything to do with that. But anyhow, I read that. I'm being a little sarcastic here.
I got that.
Yeah. Did you pick up on that? I read that their legal argument, and you're the attorney. You're the one with the expertise here. But I read that their legal argument wasn't really even a legal argument, that any legal positions they took were far-fetched, and most of it was just basically that they disagreed with the policy, and this is the essence of their lawsuit. And so really doesn't seem to have a legal leg to stand on.
Yeah, it's kind of been my thing all along. Hi, Beth. I'm so glad you got in. I just saw your request. Glad that you joined us. I know that their policy all along has been in the other executive order. They didn't like. It's like, oh, well, it's a religious ban, right? So now we don't have really that type of excuse. And so they're just kind of throwing darts to see what sticks.
Yeah.
And I think what eventually what they want to do, honestly, Bill, is they want to take this to the Supreme Court, because right now it says that the president can decide, and it doesn't have to have anything really to go on, but the president can decide whether or not these people can come into our country, whoever it is. And so I believe, and this was granted by Congress, is part of the constitutional powers of the president. And I really feel that what they want to do is take that to the Supreme Court and say, we want to get rid of that rule that allows the president this type of power. That's what they want to do.
Well, I wouldn't doubt that. I don't know, the frustrating, if that's the right word, the frustrating thing about their positions is that a lot of these people seem to think that all these other people in other countries who are not citizens of the United States somehow, some way, are entitled to the freedoms and liberties under the Constitution of the United States, which is just, to me, bizarre, number one. But number two, it kind of gives you an insight into their ideology and their worldview. They're not, in my estimation, they're not people who are appreciative of the fact that we do have a Constitution and we do have a country that ideally is to operate under the rule of law. And what I'm getting at here is that most of these people on that side who are coming out against this, because how many other Muslim countries are not on Trump's travel ban?
Pakistan.
Right.
Pakistan's on it.
There's dozens.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that the essence of this group of people, they are lawless in nature. And so they're trying to use the laws to create a lawless scenario, which is anarchy. And,
right.
and that's the very frustrating part about it, that we've come to the place that you've got the judiciary basically dictating what we do and don't do as a country. And I'm sure that the founding fathers certainly did not have that in mind when they set up the separation of powers. So
Well, and I think the one thing that the founding fathers didn't have in mind when they did that is they didn't know about the ACLU. See, and therein lies the problem. I mean, that's really the problem, because the ACLU wants to grant constitutional rights to everyone. Anybody that steps foot on this soil, ACLU wants to give them those rights. And in fact, the ACLU is now taking in more money, more donations, and just gearing up to fight this, because they think that people coming, that, you've heard that no one's illegal. You're right? That
right. Well, I mean, the ACLU, let's face it, is essentially godless.
Yes.
They have a godless mentality. And I was with a group last night outside of Santa Fe, and we were talking about some of these things. And I made this statement then, and I'll make it here, that, and this is Bill's opinion, I'm not speaking necessarily on behalf of Susan, but this is Bill's opinion, that liberalism as we see it today, and progressivism as we see it today, is, in my opinion, equivalent to the spirit of Antichrist. Because that is what they're really going for here, under the guise of being a help and an aid to the disenfranchised, to those who are poor, those who are in need. They always position themselves as, the Robin Hoods, but really it's about creating a scenario and an environment that is essentially godless. And so that's why I believe it's come to be equated with the spirit of Antichrist. So that's my view. And again, I'm not speaking for Susan there, but that's how Bill sees it.
Well, and I think, as we talked before, that progressivism is really communism, and that's what it really is. And communism has always been anti-God, and atheism has been the big thing in communism. And I think that, we do call it progressivism. It sounds more modern than communism, but when you go right down to it and you look and see exactly what it is communism. And it's with the goal of, ridding society of the family, breaking down the church, and so everything. And I think, you're right. It is Antichrist. It really is.
Well, and that's why it's important for us to not take the bait of, they're just trying to help poor people who are in need. No, that's what the adversary always does. He tries to offer something that has the appearance of being good, and it looks good to us. It's wise in our sight, but we have to make sure that we're measuring everything according to what God says. And in this particular topic, I just think it would be appropriate to point out that in Genesis chapter 10, God is the one who separated nations into their different countries and territories. And Moses makes the statement in Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 32. He says that God is the one who actually separated the different nations into their lands and established their borders. So even the idea of we want to be a borderless society. We want to let all these people come in, and everybody that steps foot here is protected under the Constitution. And now they're making the argument that people who haven't even stepped foot here are protected by the Constitution, is to erase the borders. And what I was trying to point out here is, according to the Bible, God is the one who, in the beginning, established borders and determined that nations were to be separated into their distinct lands. So even that is working against biblical principle, God's purposes. In Genesis chapter 11, the building and establishing of Babylon was this. God told everybody to spread out. And in Babylon, they said, no, we want to all come together. Globalism. That's where it's first introduced into the world.
Wow.
And that was in defiance of God, because God said he wants to spread out, fill up the world. So the leftists who are promoting the idea that, all these people are protected. And I'm not against someone who is desperate coming into a safe haven. That's okay.
Somebody's at the door. That's
yeah, I see him or her. We're supposed to be as believers, as Christians, we're supposed to be of a mind and heart to help people, to help the stranger. But that doesn't negate the fact that the stranger is expected to live by the rules and the laws of the land, and
Right.
not to receive special privilege. And so that principle should be applied today. And I think that thankfully there are people in the present administration who see that we've got to do a better job about who we're letting into this nation, and to choose 6 nations out of all the different Muslim nations in the world and say, we're going to vet these people a little bit more intensely, and we're going to just put a temporary hold on anybody from this country coming in. To assail that as, improper is just ridiculous. So.
Well, and also considering that Obama had the 7, and nobody complained at all about the 7. There was never anything said, and Obama had the exact same powers and authority. What I find is interesting too is with Hawaii, the person that they have hired was one of the lawyers that represented Al Qaeda, a member of Al Qaeda.
Well, there you go. Well, when Obama was in office, obviously the things that he did, there was always an excuse. There was always a justification for it. And of course, anybody who is not for what they're for is going to be assailed at every front. And this is very small compared to what we're talking about in terms of importance. But I saw that one of Trump's golf courses was vandalized here in the last couple of days, and they were, mocking him for, I guess, playing golf. Although, as we all know, the former president, he liked the game himself, but that seemed to be okay then. So it's just childish antics in some ways.
Well, and what they were doing on that golf course, what they were really trying to do is that those were environmental activists that are saying, you're taking our money away from us. They're going to cut the EPA down by 25%. And so they didn't like that. So they went out and this wasn't like small little letters on one part of the golf course. These were huge letters, and I don't know how they made them, but it said, and this is really stupid to what they said, no more tigers, no more woods. That's what they wrote.
Wasn't that racist?
Yeah. I mean, but it wasn't no more tiger woods. It was no more tigers, no more woods. I mean, So it didn't even make sense what they were writing. And why, if you're going to gear it, if it's about Donald Trump, why not make it about Donald Trump so people would understand what your point is? And they couldn't do that,
Well, apparently one of them thought he got real clever and thought they would come up with that. But as far as the environmentalists, the ones that I've met,
right?
And I'm all for clean water, and I live out, among the trees and the mountains, and I love being outside, and I'm all for clean air and all those things. But every environmentalist that I've ever met would just assume that I take a cyanide capsule and be done with it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you saw it as well when these environmentalists and these activists that were protesting this pipeline that was going through, the Dakotas and such. Right. What I read was they left tons of trash. They left tons of debris and left a potential environmental hazard there, all while they're protesting on behalf of the environment. So crazy.
Not only did they leave the trash and tons of it, but they abandoned their animals. They abandoned their dogs. So they threw the dogs away with the trash, essentially. And groups had to go out and round up the dogs to try to save them. They left them out in the cold. Dogs had, frostbite and everything else. So they're sometimes one of the biggest abusers of the environment all the way around.
Well, I think I said this last week, and I'll say it again, and I'll probably end up saying it again in the future, that those who are anti-God, anti-Bible, anti-family, all these biblical principles, when they rail accusations, they are typically accusing us of being guilty of what they, in fact, are guilty of.
Right.
That's the way it always has seemed to be, and so this is no exception. So anyway, as far as this quote unquote travel ban, personally, I applaud the Trump administration for actually having the backbone to try to do something. In my view, it hasn't gone far enough just yet, And that being said, and that being said, we want to always be mindful that there are people in need, and we want to try to help people who are genuinely in need. But that doesn't mean that we have to put our families in jeopardy. I'm instructed, you're instructed as believers that we're to love God with all of our heart, our soul, and our strength. And there's another commandment likened to it. We are to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so we should help our neighbor who is in need. But it seems to me that there are those who expect me to roll out the red carpet for my neighbor, and in so doing, put my own family at risk. And I'm just not going to do that.
Well, and I was going to say, and some people may disagree with that, but it's not only to roll out the red carpet to your neighbor, but it is to put you at risk by those people who are following the letter of the Quran, let's say, in Islam. If they're really stringently following it to the letter, in the Quran, it says to kill the infidels. So if you invite somebody into your home who actually believes that, then you are putting your family at risk, and you are not doing biblically what you should be doing. And I know a lot of people say, well, we have to invite these in, and God believed in charity. But God didn't believe, like you said, charity begins at home. You have to take care of your family, and in doing so, then you can take care of other people. But it doesn't mean that you have to blindly allow people to hurt you. You don't take care of those people that are going to kill you.
No. That's foolish. And there's nothing biblically that says that we're to do that,
Right.
Yeah, we turn the other cheek, but I am also instructed, line upon line, precept upon precept is a concept that you don't take one verse of scripture and you make a doctrine out of that. You take that verse of scripture and you put it with all these other verses of scripture, and then you formulate sound doctrine. And one of the first things that God instructed man to do was to take a wife and to have a family, to be fruitful and to multiply. And when God put Adam in the garden, not only did he tell him to work the garden, but he told him to keep it. And really what that Hebrew word means, Susan, is to guard it against someone who would come in and infiltrate this garden and pollute it. So there is this, we are instructed to keep and to guard those things that God has entrusted to us.
Yeah, and Laura says that, basically that love doesn't mean enabling destruction, and then
right.
I mean, but you hear a lot of Christians today, and I see them myself. They go out to help people in, let's say, the Muslim community. They will dress with hijabs on, and I say, why do you do that? You're a Christian. Why are you doing that? And they say, well, because this is to make them feel comfortable. But Bill, where is the line, between making somebody feel comfortable and sort of disowning your own Christian principles?
Well, that, Susan, is the epitome of something that Paul addresses. It's addressed in the 5 books of Moses throughout the scripture. And it's mixing what is holy with what is profane. God says, don't mix what is clean with unclean. The ideal situation is not for there to be tares mixed among the wheat. God says to his people that we are to come out from among them. That is, all the other peoples and nations and religions were to come out from among them and to be a set apart people. That doesn't mean set apart geographically. Right. It means set apart philosophically and how we think, what we do, what we don't do. And so for Christians to adorn themselves with the hijab, or in Bartlett, Tennessee, a few years back, there was a mosque being built. Bartlett is just outside of Memphis. And there was a mosque that was being built there in Bartlett. And so there was an independent, charismatic church there in the community that opened the doors of their church for these Muslims to come in and to worship in their church. And when the Muslims come in and they worship several times during the day, they will pronounce the Bismillah, which is to say there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And when they say Allahu Akbar, they're not saying God is great. Literally, they're saying God is greater, or Allah is greater. And so the question would be, greater than who? Greater than the God of the Bible is what they're really getting at. So my point here is this. What that church did in trying to love and to be caring and to reach out to the community is they offended God's word while trying not to offend them. And so these people that are going in, and I say this with all due respect to their motivation and intent, nevertheless, in our efforts not to offend, in this particular case, Muslims that we're trying to help, we're offending God.
Yeah.
So which one should receive more respect here?
Right. Yeah. And I think that, a lot of Christians, they forget that. I mean, in doing something that they think is biblical, they forget to follow the Bible and and also the people who follow the Islam to the letter of the law, they are told that you can lie in order to get what you want. So you can go in and say, oh, I love your Christian faith. It's great. And you can even go and sit down next to somebody in the church if you want to, as somebody who follows Islam like that. But you don't have to mean it. You could still be sitting there thinking, how am I going to hurt this person later on, or whatever the case may be. And that isn't to say that all Muslims do that. I'm saying somebody who follows the letter of the law, let's say under Islam. So you're allowed to lie. That's part of what you in the Quran that you're allowed to do.
Right, because you and I, as believers, are considered by Islam to be infidel.
Yes.
And you adopt whatever measures that are necessary to overcome the infidel, either to get them to see it your way or subjugate them through war and jihad, and they have to pay tribute, more or less, but the idea here is that there aren't any prohibitions when it comes to the Muslim and how he engages with the so-called infidel. And there was something else I wanted to throw into this conversation that I thought of. As you may know, I think we've talked about this before, I was a big Reagan fan back in the day. I don't agree with everything Reagan did, but I read a lot about Reagan's presidency. And several years ago, there was a man that published a book called The Reagan Diaries.
Right.
In that book, in 1986, Ronald Reagan made an entry in his diary, and I forget the exact wording of it, but he had a meeting with I think it was the CIA director at the time. I think his name was Bill Casey. And in that meeting, the CIA director had told them that they were concerned about the number of Islamic extremists who were melding into the people coming across the border in the South. And that was in 1986. They were already alerted to the fact that there were Islamic terrorists being planted among those coming across the southern border. So that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I would think that issue has been accentuated since then.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think we have so many terrorist cells in the United States, and we just seem to want to look at the other way because there is an agenda. It's a globalist agenda. It was begun a long time ago, but it certainly was in the past 8 years, also condoned. And we have more of a problem now than we've ever had. And we have to somehow wake up. And I look at this, Bill, here's the thing that really gets me too. It seems like feminism, feminists, I should say, embrace Islam. And I don't get that at all.
Well, isn't that very interesting? And, what was the group? Code Pink.
Yes.
This ultra feminist group.
Right.
They, back during the Arab Spring, this was, of course, going back several years now, but they identified with their brothers. I think that was the term they used, that were part of this Arab Spring. And as I recall, Susan, certain components of that Arab Spring included women being raped and assaulted in the streets.
Yeah.
as these mobs just fanned out, among other things, calling for the death of Israel, calling for the death of the United States. And yet you had these feminist organizations aligning themselves with such groups. So that goes back again to my belief that these leftists and progressives and these feminists that wear these ridiculous and vulgar hats in the streets of the nation's capital, they align themselves with people who want to see our destruction. So
Yeah.
I go back to the concept of the spirit of Antichrist, but there's something else here in Scripture, and I'm hesitant to even get into this, but I'll just throw it out there. When the woman took the fruit and ate it, and then gave it to her husband, who took the fruit and ate it. And God began to talk to Adam and said, what is this you've done? Well, the woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, the ground's going to be cursed for your sake. And then he turns to the woman and he says, and I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, from now on, when you give birth, your sorrows are going to be multiplied and your desire will be into your husband. It sounds like on the surface that she would desire to be with her husband. What the Hebrew text seems to hint at the very least, is that her desire will be to usurp his leadership and authority in the family. In other words, to take over his role. And I say that because that's what these feminists want. I'm all for, my wife is a very strong woman. She's a very strong woman. You don't tell her she can't do something. She'll prove you wrong every time.
She's a Southern woman. Okay.
That's right. But she's also a woman who understands the way God has set things up. And usually when she's getting on to me, it's because, hey, Buster, you need to be the head of the household. You need to assert your responsibility here and your role here. Not trying to take my role, but hey, get it in gear and step into that role. And so, but you've got all these feminists out there that want to, you correct me if I'm wrong here. There are a lot of these feminists that they're quite content to live without a man in their life. That's why so many lesbians are feminists.
Yeah.
That is not a political issue. They're coming against the standards that God has established in the very beginning. Once again, hinting at all of this has the spirit of Antichrist behind it.
Yeah. And two, I know this is a touchy subject for some people, but I think while we're talking about it, one of the interesting things is, in the Bible, when it says the man is to be the head of the household, and all that, men have allowed themselves to be taken from that position. They've allowed feminists to say, hey, you're a man and we don't want you, get out of the way, we don't need you. And so men have sort of taken a back seat. And in order to be, the head of the household, and that doesn't mean to be, over the woman or better than the woman or anything like that.
Right.
But in order to be able to assert that position and for a woman to want to, I hate to say it this way, but before a woman will allow you to do that, right, is that you have to be the person who steps up and actually does that and not allow. And unfortunately, especially today in millennials, I've seen so many of them not want that position. They don't want to be the head of anything. They allow the women to tell them they shouldn't be, to take a back seat, and that's what they do. So, that's a big problem. I
agree 110%. As a matter of fact, go back to that story in the garden. Adam was told, and I'm going to put it in plain English, it was told to work the garden and to guard the garden. Now, if he was told to guard the garden, then there was somebody out there God didn't want to get into the garden. But it was Adam's responsibility to make sure that didn't happen. Well, when the serpent, who the Bible makes very clear is the adversary, is in the garden, he's in the midst of the garden. He's in the most intimate area of the garden. So that tells me right then and there that Adam was already watching ESPN and, he was already, distracted by all these other things, because if he had been doing his job, if he had been stepping up and doing what he was supposed to be doing in the first place, I'm going to argue that conversation between the woman and the serpent never occurs. And not only that, But when she does take and eat this fruit, the Bible says that she then gives it to her husband who was with her. It insinuates that Adam's there while all this is going on. So I'm just kind of supporting your point that one of the main reasons that feminism has been so pervasive in our cultures in society is not because of the feminist. It's because of the men who have allowed them to do this, who've been quite content to allow the wife or the woman to take charge and be over all of these things. And so, the blame does not lie with the women. The blame comes at the doorstep of men. And that's why I said a while ago, my wife is a very strong woman. But when she has, trying to think of the proper way to put this, gotten in my face, so to speak, it's because she felt and was right. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing as the head of the household. And she was saying, Buster, you need to get your act in gear and take the head here and take the position and be who God put you here to be.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people forget the other side of that in the Bible, which is that the man is supposed to serve his wife. And that doesn't mean be a slave to his wife, but serve his wife, and to also lay down his life for his wife if need be. And so people leave that part out, and that's very important. And again, it's not having one, the man better than the woman better than the man. It basically, if you look at it, it's an equal job to do. Each person has to do their own part. And the inequality comes when each person is not doing their own part,
Well, again, from the beginning, here's the way God established it, that when he presented the woman unto the man, Adam said, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And then Moses said, and for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, side by side, not one in front of the other, not one over the other, but side by side. Yes, with different roles to play. The man to be the one who leads the household. But as you said, and it's what Paul wrote about in Colossians, and I think I saw a comment come up about that just a moment ago.
Yes.
How that, men are supposed to love their wives as Messiah loved the church.
Yeah.
In that he was willing to he was willing to lay down his life on behalf of them. And so that's the role we're to play as men, as husbands.
Yeah. And Bob is saying, he's getting a lot of mixed messages from the current Pope too. And speaking of that, I don't know if you saw, but recently the Pope is calling for a reduction in the birth rate amongst Catholics, which is, not biblical, and considering allowing priests to be married, which really isn't covered in the Bible. I mean, that part is, I think Paul wanted that, but I mean, I don't know necessarily that has to be. So, I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, there are mixed messages coming from the Pope, that in some instances, in my opinion, don't follow biblical teachings.
Well, I realize that there may be some folks that are watching and listening to this that are Catholic. And so I certainly would not want to offend anyone. Sure. That being said, I'm not Catholic. Right. And so the Pope is not the final word for me. The word is the final word. When it comes to priests marrying, now I'm going to give you my opinion. They probably should have been doing that all along. Yeah. Frankly. Because if they had been doing that all along, then the Catholic Church may not have suffered all these scandals as it relates to, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So if they had been allowed to marry and actually have wives, then perhaps that wouldn't have been nearly the issue. So I think that was, and I don't know the history of it as far as, why priests are not allowed to marry in the Catholic Church. And so I won't pretend to know that, all of the details on that. I would just guess that was probably some man-made injunction. And anytime that we come up with our own rules and laws and things like that, according to the Messiah, your traditions, he said, have made the commandments of God of none effect. And the commandment of God was a man and wife come together as one flesh, and then they are fruitful and they multiply,
Right.
and they fill the earth. And so in the second part of this issue that we're discussing, to fill the earth means just that, to fill the earth. God wasn't concerned that it would get overpopulated necessarily.
Right.
So it's not for us to, and again, I say this respectfully, it's not for any man to step into the place of God and speak as God, and especially to supersede what God says.
Anne was saying that some Catholics that she knows, they're very offended by, the current Pope. And, some Catholics that I've talked to, and just in general, the Pope, this particular Pope is very much a socialist. And so kind of what you're hearing, to me, in the political realm of it, it sounds more like it's coming from the political side rather than the biblical side in that regard, and what he's doing, how he sees things, social justice, social welfare, everything else. And I sometimes I don't see the biblical part of it.
Well, isn't the Vatican more or less a political entity?
well,
Well,
to the Catholics, but yes,
right. Well, just observing from afar, it seems to be more of a political entity than anything else.
Yeah.
It's its own sovereign state there inside of Rome. Presidents and leaders and prime ministers, go to have an audience with the Pope, just like they would with any other head of state. And so to me, it seems that, and this to some degree would be true with Christendom the world over. We have allowed politics and social issues and cultural issues to establish doctrine for us and allow the culture to influence us, rather than allowing the Word of God in us to affect culture. Now, that, there are certain positions that the Catholic Church takes, abortion, things
right.
like that obviously we agree with. But nevertheless, if it seems to me that if this Pope is speaking from the perspective of social concerns, the world population, for instance,
right,
then he is allowing the politics of the day to influence what Christians are supposed to hear, what Christians are supposed to be promoting.
Right. And as we talked before, because of the, the people who follow Islam, about 2050, there should be more of them than there are Christians. So to encourage a lower birth rate, to me, it's scary. One, it's against the Bible. Two, but it also allows the, Islam to grow when you're not growing Christianity necessarily in the United States.
Well,
and around the world.
Yeah. Well, suffice it to say that I'm not going to take the Pope's guidance on this.
Yeah.
For me, he doesn't speak as the final authority. The final authority is that book that we call the Bible. Now, that being said, I'm 54 years old. I have 4 children. I've done my duty. So
you listened well, right?
Yes, I had a T-shirt, 4 and no more. So,
well, let's change it over to a little bit of a different subject. Let's talk about too how the media seems very biased against this president. No matter what this president does, no matter what happens in this administration, they're not going to let up. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I'm not at all surprised. To me, it's just typical of something we mentioned earlier, that those that are guilty of something usually seem to be accusing others of that very thing. And,
right.
They're trying to make it out that the Trump administration is trying to shut down freedom of speech and all this kind of stuff, when in reality, given the positions that they've taken with other candidates and other presidents and other administrations and suppressing news or trying to sweep it under the rug, that's the very thing that they've done.
Yeah.
Now, should Trump engage in a war with the media? I don't know. I really don't know. I will say this, that when he has taken certain positions and and stirred the pot, so to speak. And all the pundits were on television saying, this is a big mistake. This is a big mistake. It's always kind of worked out for him.
Yeah.
I know. It's kind of worked out for him. But, you know, as far as the media, the mainstream media, I think it's obvious to all of us where they fall on all these things. And so why we would even listen to them with any, you know, giving them any degree of respectability, I don't know at this point. I certainly do not. Yeah. And so, no, I'm not surprised at all that they're biased toward this administration, and will, I believe, in conjunction with other political entities that are operating behind the scenes, hint, hint, wink, wink, are going to do everything they can to undermine the Trump administration. So,
yeah. It's going to go on for four and hopefully 8 years, but you know, it will go on. It's not going to stop. It's something, again, we talk about this, but it's right out of the Saul Alinsky book. I mean, it really is. It's a playbook they have, and they use words, and they know how to go in and continue to say something about, let's say, the Trump administration, to make whatever things that they want to say about them. And then what happens is you say it over and over and over and say it long enough, and you get people to believe you and to believe that it's true. So, and that's what we're seeing, that it's not going to let up. It's probably only going to get worse. And you have people coming out every day like Nancy Pelosi and you know, Chuck Schumer, these people that you just can't believe anybody listens to anyway. And they come out and they just say their lies, and people believe that, you know, and it just continued.
Well, if it came out of the Saul Alinsky book, you know, the basic handbook for radicals, you remember that until recently, the foreword of his book was dedicated to the one he considered to be the first radical.
Yeah.
And that was Lucifer.
Yes. Yeah. Scary, isn't it?
So, I mean, that should tell you what you need to know right there.
Yeah. Yep. No, it's amazing. And people look at that and I don't know that they read forwards, but they really should, because, I think that would stop some people, at least, from looking at that and thinking this is a good idea. Let's talk about, too, we've had a lot of WikiLeaks coming out saying that the CIA has been watching us. They watch us through Samsung TV.
Yeah. Surprise. Oh, my goodness. I had no idea.
Who knew? I mean, is there anything, you know, biblically about that type of stuff happening to us in this?
Well, you know, when it comes to them looking at us, or potentially looking at us, you know, several years ago, I have a good friend who made a statement on a television program that ended in a visit from the FBI. And so they did a thorough investigation on this guy. And so he and I being closely related, I'm pretty sure that there's a dossier with my name on it somewhere. All right. But my position has been this. I'm going to the best of my ability, promote what is true as it relates to, you know, as it comes from God's word. And I'm going to look to God to protect me. I'm not saying that they won't try to look into what you're doing or what I'm doing or what we're doing. I'm not saying that. I'm just going to leave it that only God can protect you and I in this particular situation. And I do believe that the weapons that are formed against us shall not prosper. That's either true or it's not. So I'm not going to, wear a tinfoil hat trying to figure out if there's some, radio wave going through my house. And I'm not going to be looking over my shoulder all the time. I'm going to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And I'm going to go about doing what God called us to do. You know that there were people plotting against the Messiah almost immediately from the beginning of his ministry. And there were several times that people wanted to take him and they wanted to kill him. But the Bible kept telling us something. It was not yet the time. His time had not yet come. And so if you and I and all of those watching and listening are living the lives that we're supposed to be, doing what God has called us to do, then I'm convinced that God's not going to let somebody else do anything to us before it's time. That being said, we have to also remember that he told us that we would be delivered up before kings and courts, and that we were not to take any thought of what we were going to say, but when we found ourselves in those situations, that he would give us the words to say. Paul was delivered up before these kings and all these rulers, and in shackles, he gave them the gospel. So yeah. I'm not going to live in fear of those things. Does it happen? Yes, they're probably somebody monitoring this right now. I mean, potentially. But if they are, then they need to get saved. Right. So hear that part.
Yeah.
Now, let me quickly go to another part of this. Those things that intelligence communities are doing, saying, plotting, and I'm going to add this onto that: the shadow government that's scheming and plotting and doing all these things. Right. Here's what the Messiah said about that: everything that is spoken in secret is going to be shouted from the rooftops. And everything that is done in darkness is going to be brought to the light. So eventually, all these things are going to come to light.
Well, and WikiLeaks is certainly trying to do their part in making this.
Well, God doesn't say he necessarily is going to use you to do it or me to do it. He can use somebody like, WikiLeaks to bring all these things to light. And, and this isn't what we were talking about necessarily. But, this whole Russian collusion thing, with the Trump administration, based on what WikiLeaks released, having something to do with this, the things that were released about Hillary Clinton and her campaign and the Democrats didn't affect the election. It just revealed how corrupt these people really are.
Yeah. But it's amazing too that when all this corruption was revealed, we really did nothing, not necessarily, but we really did nothing with it. I mean, it may have helped, Donald Trump win the election, but we haven't gone against these people. We haven't used this information that's out there to prosecute any of these people. It seems like the people on the left are getting away with things. The people on the right necessarily aren't getting away with things. It's sort of an injustice, if you will. Evil right now is winning. And we know it doesn't in the end, but right now, in a lot of respects, sometimes, evil wins. And that's hard sometimes for people to take. You're trying to do the right thing, and then you see the corruption on the left, and it continues.
Well, it does. I mean, and David wrote in the Psalms words more or less to that effect. God, why does it seem like the wicked prosper?
Yes.
And it certainly seems that way today. But that's why I would say, Susan, that what you and I have to be committed to, because our first calling is as believers. And so our calling is to fight for righteousness. And if we fight for righteousness, then eventually it will overcome the wickedness. So, and until then, we're just going to have to grit our teeth, and we're going to have to endure, and we're going to have to continue day by day, step by step, to go forward in what's right.
Yeah. And I think it's also why I do what I do, why you do what you do. We are called as like watchmen. That's the way I kind of see what I do, to tell people the truth, to warn them of what's out there, to warn them that time is short, that you should be saved. And then, that's your part. That's all you have to do. There's nothing you can do whether a person accepts it or not, but you have to do your part in that, in warning others.
Well, and hopefully, as we continue to do these programs, and you being the watchman on the wall as you are, and me trying to see how or what God is saying through all these things, that we'll continue along with the others to bring people into the light of what's going on, and eventually and ultimately point them to the one who has all the answers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we have just a few minutes left, and I want to kind of get this in because it's important. Recently, Putin met with Netanyahu I think Netanyahu went to Russia. I'm not sure where the meeting took place, but they met just recently. And, it was on, Purim, right? Am I saying that right? Purim.
Purim, yeah, yes.
Purim. I always get that wrong, but I know what it is. And that's when Israel was attacked by Persia, which is the modern day Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And they were discussing the fact that Iran is still an enemy of Israel and how Israel was still concerned about that. And Putin kind of said to Netanyahu, that's so 5th century. Why are you still talking like that? That's not a problem. You need to get into the 2017 and let's get on with it here. And, that's so crazy. I mean, they have the missiles, the rockets, whatever you want to call them, that Iran uses against Israel always has, death to Israel on it, death to America. And for Putin to say, there's no problem, because right now Iran wants to bring in their navy into Syria and set up in Syria. And I don't know about you, but that's a big problem for the Damascus area, and that's in the Bible, and also for Israel. Your thoughts on that?
Well, Iran is an enemy of Israel. Persia has long been an enemy of Israel. And the story of Purim is basically this, and I know we've just got a couple of minutes here, but the story of Purim is that even though God is not mentioned in that book, the book of Esther, God is at work behind the scenes. Right. But it also becomes clear that even though God is orchestrating events, it becomes necessary for God's people to stand up and fight. That's how their deliverance came, because they were equipped and sober-minded and prepared to defend themselves. And so, Mr. Netanyahu is no fool. He knows that Iran, given any opportunity, would annihilate Israel. And so my perception of him is that I don't know what his faith is, but it seems to me that nonetheless he is being used by God at this point in time to keep Israel strong and alert and aware of all the threats that are around it. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I look at it as, Isaiah 17 and the destruction of Damascus, it will be a ruinous heap. I look at that and go, if you put Iran in there and Syria is right next to Israel, you've got a serious problem of perhaps seeing that come to fruition pretty quickly. And Ezekiel 38 and 39, where probably, Iran, Turkey, Russia are going to come at a certain point against Israel. And you line up a fleet in there with Iran and Russia and Syria. You've got pretty much anybody and everybody who can come against Israel and go in the Golan Heights. I mean, it's absolutely crazy for Putin to say, there's no big deal. And I have to believe that Putin knows that it is a big deal.
Well, of course he does. And I want to point out something here. In Ezekiel 38:9, if you read that, there are 2 nations that are missing. They're not mentioned.
Yeah, we're one of them.
Syria and Persia,
yeah.
Which leads you to think that something might happen before all that other happens.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, you look at it again. I would think they would be involved in Damascus and the destruction of Damascus. People have talked about that there are weapons of mass destruction that were removed from Iraq into Damascus, and that's where they're at, and that's why we didn't find them in Iraq. And I'm not just making that up. These are people with high authority, that are saying that.
An Iraqi general made that comment, that statement years ago. Yeah. Yes.
So you could understand why Damascus could become a ruinous heap, with all of that there. And I think Israel is wise to say, no, Iran, we don't want you setting up in Syria.
Well, they would be fools to allow that to happen. And I don't think under Netanyahu anyway, that they're going to allow that to happen. Yeah. They will do what they have to do. And I think in that regard, Netanyahu is a very strong leader, because whatever his political philosophy is, he is mindful of the fact that Israel is outnumbered, surrounded on every side, and that they're going to have to stand up and fight for themselves.
It's amazing though too how in Israel, if you check in sometimes the news there, Netanyahu has his own problems. Like with Trump over here, people are coming after Netanyahu and accusing him of different things. It's kind of like they're trying to get him out and replaced, just like they're trying to get Trump impeached and replaced. Because if you see somebody who's trying to do the right thing, it seems like evil is everywhere. It's not just in the United States trying to get things done, but it's all over.
Well, as someone who has traveled to Israel many, many times, I will tell you that Israel is full of leftists and progressives and
Right.
secularists, just as much as it is present in the United States. So,
It's hard to believe, in my opinion. You know, you look at that, and people still vote for the leftist party, you know, for the extreme left party in the United States and in Israel as well. So, I mean, none of it makes sense, but you know, that's kind of the world that we live in. Before we go, any quick comments or questions? We've run out of time, and you know, if next week you could just kind of remind everybody, we're going to be right here on this page at this same time. Come with questions, come with comments. We love to have you comment, and so glad that you came in here today and made the comments that you did. And I know I don't want to speak for Bill. Bill, you probably have some things that you want to say as well.
well, I appreciate those who are coming into the room, and we just, as we do this each week, just kind of help us out and let your friends and family know what we're doing, and put it on your Facebook and help us get the word out there so that more people can hear this. And because next week we'll be back at the same bat time, same bat station, right?
That's right. And basically too, you can go to SusanKnowles.com. I'm going to be posting that there. Bill, you're probably going to be posting this. Where are you going to post yours at?
We'll post it on our Facebook, Shorshing Ministries with Bill Cloud. We'll be tweeting it out, and we'll be sending an email out to all the people who are on our email list, so they can go to billcloud.org and they can get on our email list, and we'll send them links out that way as well.
Yeah, and also it's going to stay right there on Stand for Truth with Susan Knowles. You should be able, it's a public group, you should be able to send that out right there from that link for everybody to see, and just to keep sending the word out, and keep let's bringing more people in here to get all together. Now, Ann says, thank you, Susan and Bill, for your time and insight. Thank you, Ann, for yours as well, and for coming in. And you know, again, we'll see you next week. Thank you for being here, and take care of yourself. God bless you, and we'll talk to you really soon. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for sharing. Take care.